Hello everyone and most welcome to 1853 of the H series. And today I have the privilege and the honor to present a new paper by Francis Y. Lynn. The grammatical nature of Wittgenstein's private language investigation. And a note already at this instance is that the private language argument is going to be, I'm going to use the acronym PLA for convenience. PLA, that is. In the abstract, in this paper, I examine the grammatical nature of Wittgenstein's private language argument, PLA. On my interpretation, the definition of private language implies that the private speaker has no natural expressions for his sensations. This in turn implies that he has no criterion of correctness for using his sensation words. This then implies, together with a grammatical rule, that a word is senseless without a criterion of correctness for its use. The private sensation words are senseless, and hence also that private language is senseless. So in my analysis, Wittgenstein succeeds in dissolving the problem of private language through a grammatical investigation. And therefore, his treatment of private language is consistent with his meta-philosophy. I further explain that Wittgenstein provides a diagnosis of the error of the philosopher who thinks that private language is possible, and that he also offers a therapy consisting of analogies or objects of comparison. I will also make a comparison with previous studies on the PLA and discuss a number of novelties in my interpretation. 1. Introduction. Private language is arguably the most important topic in Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations. There are several reasons for this. One is that the so-called private language argument, PLA, is related to a host of other problems, such as phenomenological language, rule following, solipsism, and skepticism. Another reason is that a great many papers and books have been written on private language. A third reason is that understanding the PLA is crucial for understanding Wittgenstein's later philosophy. Let me explain this. As it is known to all Wittgenstein scholars, he only states what everyone admits and makes no hypothesis. His investigation is a grammatical one whose aim is to show that all philosophical problems should completely disappear.
Disappear.
Now, if what Wittgenstein says about philosophy is true, then the PLA should conform to this conception. If the PLA contained any disputable statements, then Wittgenstein would be wrong about his philosophy and would be guilty of bragging. Yet the fact is that the PLA is full of interpretational disputes. It would be too big a task for the present paper to review all these disputes. but a brief outline of them would help understand the current situation and motivate the present paper. It seems to me that the disputes can be classified into two broad categories. Those concerning the PLA specifically, and those pertaining to Wittgenstein's later philosophy in general.
In general.
Could we try going up a bit in size, maybe 100 and, I don't know, 180, 90, something like that? That is better already. The disputes concerning specifically the PLA include the following. First, disputes over the definition of private language. For example, there's a debate between the so-called community view and individualist view. According to the former, a private language is one spoken by a person in complete isolation. And such a language is impossible. The individualists argue to the contrary, that such a language is possible. But does Wittgenstein really mean such a language by private language? Second, disputes over the conclusions of the PLA. Many commentators think that for Wittgenstein, private language is impossible. Yet some others, for example, the later Baker and Mulhall, hold that Wittgenstein's real point is that private language is senseless.
Senseless.
Third, disputes over why private language is impossible or senseless.
There exists a variety of interpretations in the literature. How to, yeah, thanks. How to interpret the PLA is often influenced by how to interpret Wittgenstein's later philosophy on the whole. And there are also disputes over how the letter should be done. There is a debate over whether the interpretation of Wittgenstein's later philosophy should be based solely on philosophical investigation or it should be done by incorporating texts from his Nachlass. This debate is related to the debate over whether Wittgenstein's later philosophy was stable or whether it went through significant changes. For example, Schulte argues that Wittgenstein's attitude toward philosophical method, which is close related to grammar, went through significant changes between BT and PI, whereas Hacker argues that Wittgenstein's conception of philosophy and grammar did not change fundamentally from BT to PI. There are also disputes over how to best interpret Wittgenstein's later philosophy. There are at least 3 readings. 1, the so-called theory reading, often attributed to Baker and Hacker. The so-called therapy reading associated with the new Wittgensteinians and the later Baker. And 3, the multiple voice reading put forward by Stern. According to the theory reading, Wittgenstein develops and defends theses. For example, about grammar and linguistic rules in order to dissolve philosophical problems. On the therapy reading, the philosopher gets into trouble because his thoughts are incoherent and inconsistent, and he has been held captive by a certain false or misleading picture.
Picture.
Wittgenstein's task is to make the philosopher see and help him untangle the incoherencies and inconsistencies by providing therapies.
Therapy.
For example, by providing alternative pictures. On the multiple voice reading, there are three voices of the narrator, the interlocutor, and the commentator. Wittgenstein dissolves philosophical problems by means of a dialogue between opposing voices, and the commentator comes closer to expressing Wittgenstein's own viewpoint. And we can continue, please, Kalle. The above brief review of the disputes makes clear that the PLA is controversial among Wittgenstein scholars. The situation is greatly worrying. Do the disputes mean that Wittgenstein's metaphysical statements are exaggerations? Has he failed to dissolve the problem of private language? Is he an inconsistent philosopher? Many other similar questions also arise. The situation is also terribly worrying for a commentator who still wants to write something on Wittgenstein's private language remarks. Given that so much has been written on this topic,
and that the bar is set very high. What reasons can one have for writing something else? And what new one can one still offer? My main reason for writing the current paper, the present paper, is that I want to show that Wittgenstein's meta-philosophy is consistent with his philosophical practice, at least with his handling of the problem of private language. If the PLA is consistent with the meta-philosophy, then it should not contain any disputable statements. What can yield such indisputability then? I will suggest that the answer is grammar. That grammar is indisputable. That grammar is indisputable will be the central novelty in my interpretation of the PLA, as I will argue. In other words, my interpretation will be based on a close examination of the grammar used in PLA, a grammar that is admitted by everyone. Another reason for my writing the present paper is that I hope that my work can contribute to the resolution of the aforementioned disputes. I will, in the next section, present my view on the disputes over how to interpret Wittgenstein's later philosophy. My view on the disputes over how to interpret the PLA will be discussed at various places in the rest of the paper. For ease of exposition, I will adopt the following strategy. I will first present my interpretation of the PLA And then I will compare it with some other interpretations seen in the literature. My justification for doing so is this. Wittgenstein's philosophical investigation is a grammatical one. So his PLA should be a grammatical one too. Once we have a grammar-based interpretation of the PLA, we will find it easier to understand other interpretations and to see their shortcomings. Sections 2 to 7 below present my interpretation of the PLA, which includes my reading of grammar, the definition of private language, the conclusion of the PLA, and how it is arrived at, and so on.
So
On to Wittgenstein on grammar. Like my granny. Grammar is a central topic in the study of Wittgenstein's later philosophy. I cannot attempt at providing a comprehensive account of Wittgenstein's grammar in the confine of this section. So my discussion here is explorative. Nevertheless, I hope that my discussion can contribute to the understanding of Wittgenstein's grammar. Wittgenstein proclaims that his investigation is a grammatical one. A number of scholars have made strenuous efforts to explain Wittgenstein's notion of grammar. For example, Hilmy, Savicki, Baker, Forster, McGinn, Hacker, Engelmann, and Schroeder.
Strenius. Baker.
Schröder. But these discussions are often conducted at the general level. Without making clear, one, what Wittgenstein's grammar actually is, two, exactly how he uses it to dissolve specific philosophical problems. But these discussions are often conducted at the general level without making clear, these two deficiencies need to be removed if we are to obtain an adequate understanding of Wittgenstein's grammatical investigations. In the next few sections, I will present the grammar Wittgenstein uses to dissolve the problem of private language. But let me first explicate my understanding of what Wittgenstein's grammar is. First, the role of grammar. Grammar has been the center of Wittgenstein's later philosophy since the very beginning. In his Cambridge lectures, he says, the rules of grammar distinguish sense and nonsense. And if I use the forbidden combinations, I talk nonsense. Nonsense. And the sign plus the rules of grammar applying to it is all we need.
Read.
This shows that for Wittgenstein, grammar distinguishes sense and nonsense and can be used to dissolve philosophical problems. And this explains why his investigation is a grammatical one. Second, two important features of grammar. Grammar consists of grammatical rules, which specify how words should be used. There are two important features of grammatical rules. One is indisputability. The only things that are exact and unambiguous and indisputable are the grammatical rules, which in the end must show what is meant. The other feature is knownness. every competent speaker of a language knows the grammatical rules of the word. They are what we have always known. And what we need to remind ourselves of Wittgenstein reminds us of different grammatical rules in dissolving different philosophical problems. In the next few sections, I will focus on these two features, especially the indisputability feature. When I examine the grammar Wittgenstein uses in dealing with private language, at this juncture, an objection might be raised against the above treatment of mine. One might say that I rely heavily on Wittgenstein's remarks in the 1930s. And one might say, and might argue, that Wittgenstein's thoughts changed afterwards. For instance,
Afterwards,
Schulte.
Schulte.
Against such an objection, I have two ways of defending my treatment. One is to counter-argue, as Hacker does, that Wittgenstein's conception of philosophy and grammar did not change fundamentally from BT to PI. Such debates are useful, but it would be difficult to decide the issue in this way.
This way I did it my way.
Which view will win? Will win out? Will ultimately depend on which can give a satisfactory explanation of Wittgenstein's later philosophy. So my second way of defining my treatment is to argue that it can provide such an explanation So my second view of defining my treatment can explain Wittgenstein's meta-philosophy well. And second, it can also explain well Wittgenstein's philosophical practice. For part 2, I will take the PLA as an example and show that it is based on indisputable grammatical rules. That will be the task of ensuing few sections. I will now present part 1 of my argument. Wittgenstein's meta-philosophy requires that what he says must be admitted by everybody.
Everybody.
This seems to be a tall order. In philosophy, it is customary for someone to put forward arguments, which are then criticized by others with their own arguments. In other words, it is commonly thought that philosophy is full of arguments. So, how can one make statements that are indisputable? When G. Moore looked at his hand and said, "This is a hand," was his statement indisputable? Well, some skeptics do doubt about the truth of it. For in their view, only immediate experiences are certain. What about the skeptic's own statements? Well, fair enough. For example, a typical statement in skepticism is only I can know whether I am really in pain. Another person can only surmise it. Does everyone agree with this statement? Wittgenstein certainly does not. So it seems that in philosophy, no statements can really be indisputable. How can Wittgenstein claim that all he says is beyond dispute? We have here encountered the most difficult part of Wittgenstein's philosophy, which is that he only says what everyone admits, what is beyond dispute. This is also the most original part of his philosophy, which is distinct from all other philosophers' thought. And I think that this is where Wittgenstein's genius lies. He writes, only the only things that are exact and unambiguous and indisputable are the grammatical rules, which in the end must show what is meant. Notice the word only in this remark. Only. The grammatical rules are indisputable. As I said in the preceding paragraph, Moore's statement, "This is a hand," is disputable. And so are such statements as, "There are 2 trees in my garden." Einstein was a physicist. And so on and so forth. Yet grammatical rules, and only they, are indisputable. How are we to understand this? Anyone of whatever philosophical persuasion, when making a statement which he intends others to understand, must use words in such a way that they make sense. For example, when a skeptic says, "Only I know that I am in pain,"
Pain, pain.
he himself must think that his words make sense. And that he is not speaking nonsense. There are grammatical rules which govern his use of words, and these are agreed to by him and all others who speak English. Take a simple example. For the word red to make sense, to mean the color red, red and green just cannot occur at the same place simultaneously. And if they did, the word red would not have the meaning we think it has. The grammatical rule red and green cannot occur at the same place simultaneously must be agreed by anyone who wants to use the word red with the usual sense it has. When Wittgenstein says that he only states what everyone admits, he means to state only two kinds of things. One kind is the grammatical rule, which is indisputable, as just explained. The other kind is the thesis. Wittgenstein writes, if someone were to advance thesis in philosophy, it would never be possible to debate them because everyone would agree to them. Why does Wittgenstein want to advance thesis? We must understand Wittgenstein's motivation behind describing grammatical rules. He does not do it for its own sake. Rather, he wants to dissolve philosophical problems through an investigation of grammatical rules. So he has to state some results of this grammatical investigation, many of which look like theses in traditional philosophy. Wittgenstein's theses are made on the basis of grammatical rules and thus are also indisputable. I will call them grammatical theses to form a family. Understanding is not a state of consciousness, and essence is expressed by grammar. And I will show later that private language is senseless, is also such a thesis. Wittgenstein's indisputable remarks thus fall into two categories: rule describing remarks and result stating remarks of or thesis. Both are grammatical remarks or statements. I think that's time to put a pause here. Statements being the last word of 1853. Let's have a look-see. It was a lot of introduction here, so it took a time before we got into some actual writing. But we have enough for a discussion. We can go to page 2nd page, which is aptly named the 2nd page as well. Very practical. 3rd line here, this is a part of a sentence. He only states what everyone admits. Remember that. He makes no hypothesis. His investigation is a grammatical one. And we go down to the 2nd paragraph of that page. And I will just mention this is a condensation, so I won't read it. But you learn that Baker and Mulhall means that Wittgenstein's real point is that private language is senseless. To the bottom of the 3rd paragraph, here we have different tools of Wittgenstein. And the one that I think is very informative is the multiple voice reading. There are 3 voices: the narrator, the interlocutor, and the commentator. And the interlocutor is often called Frege, but it is also the view that the reader has most commonly, or what he thinks is his view. I think that last thing is very important. And then we go to the next page, the sub-chapter Wittgenstein on grammar. What Lin here means is that Hilmi, Baker, Hacke, all of them I read, are missing the point. And on the 5th line on the 2nd paragraph under the new chapter. But these discussions are often conducted at the general level, and that is a very good hint. They generalize too much, so it doesn't mean anything. And we learn that this is the way of doing generalization, universalization, globalization, and so on. And they fail to make clear what Wittgenstein's grammar actually is, and second, exactly how he uses it to dissolve specific philosophical problems. This is the starting point of Francis violin, which is where he put his surgical knife, so to speak, the metaphorical surgical knife. And go to the last paragraph there. Stating the obvious, but not so obvious. 2nd sentence on that. Grammar consists of grammatical rules which specify how words should be used. There are two important features of grammatical rules. And listen up very carefully. I will say this only once. One is indisputability. The only things that are exact and unambiguous and indisputable are the grammatical rules, which in the end must show what is meant. The other feature number two, is knownness. Every, next page, competent speaker of a language knows the grammatical rules of the words. They are what we have always known. And this last, what we have always known, it's going to become clearer later on, but do remember it already now. And second, what we need to remind ourselves of. We've forgotten somewhere. This is the amnesia of Heidegger. It's a sort of forgetfulness. And then we go to the fun part. It should be some humor here. And this is, of course, G.E. Moore. Third paragraph. When G.E. Moore, it's the fourth line or fifth line, looked at his hand and said, "This is a hand," was his statement indisputable. But the thing is, it is far from indisputable. And Wittgenstein brings other subjects into. There are two trees in my garden. Einstein was a physicist, and so on and so forth. And now listen. At the end of the next paragraph, the penultimate paragraph, about 8 lines from the bottom. For example, when a skeptic says, "I only know that I'm in pain," and listen now, he himself must think that his words make sense and that he's not speaking nonsense. They are obeying the grammatical rule. That is indisputable. He cannot even himself know if he's in pain, but he can express it, he can think it. When he's engaging in the outer world, I might add, or the rule, the criteria, the usage, and so forth. These are all hints coming from me, but the indisputable is both the feeler of pain and all other ones. That is the grammatical rule that makes his statement understandable. So at the end here of the same paragraph, the grammatical rule: red and green cannot occur at the same place simultaneously, must be agreed by anyone who wants to use the word red with the usual sense it has. And that, oddly enough, goes for wave and particle in quantum mechanics. It's tough to understand, but the grammatical rule, so to speak, in physics is they cannot be at the same descriptive level or at the same place or in the same universe. It's getting odder and odder. And we go down to the end of the last paragraph here. The other kind is the thesis. Wittgenstein writes, if someone were to advance thesis in philosophy, it would never be possible to debate them because everyone would agree to them. So why does Wittgenstein want to advance thesis? He starts on the bedrock. This makes Wittgenstein absolutely unique among philosophers. It also makes him unique among thinkers. And I do like it because I never liked the philosophical doubt of René Descartes or G.E. Moore and for other things. And I always said that stretching a hand in front of you, say, this is indisputable, is not shared. But the grammar that makes his sentence understandable, that is shared. That says it cannot be a hand and a no hand at the same time in the same sentence. So a little sum up the very last two sentences. So, Wittgenstein's indisputable remarks thus fall into two categories, the end of the first paragraph, that page. Rule describing remarks and result stating remarks. So he points out the rules, red and green, cannot be at the same place, and the results of it that you cannot say, well, this one is green on top of red. Both are grammatical remarks or statements. Kalle, more than welcome to join. Do not forget the microphone so your lovely comments will be heard.
Thank you, thank you. This expression, essence, is expressed by grammar. Philosophical Investigations 371 is somewhat paradoxical because Wittgenstein was against essence. He wanted game, language game was his thing, so to say.
Yes, very good statement. Perfect.
So there is more going on here than.
Yes, one could say, I give it a big try. I missed that when I read it, but he's using essence not in the idea of an origin. He's not making an ostensive definition towards grammar. So it's not the essence in the form of something that you can explain. Whereas essence usually as we talked about essence before when it comes to Bernard and Cangleham and Francois Jacob, they use essence in the idea of something immutable that you can explain and you can tell that the DNA is an essence without really knowing what it is. It's something transcendental. And you don't agree on it. We have all different essences, so to speak, because that sort of essence of Cangleham and Jacob are PLA essences. That's my short version of it.
Yes, in other words, essence is not about having origins, but it's about game.
Yeah,
play.
yeah, definitely. Yes. Yeah, very good.
And let me also go this fun thing about the hand, if it's fun.
It's fun. Have you heard it before?
No, actually not.
No. It's very odd.
So it's indeed those who doubt this statement, that is the epistemologists and Descartes and all the others, they're actually jumping over one step, as you pointed out. They're jumping over one step, meaning that even they forget about one step, namely that they're able even to make that statement.
Yeah.
Means that they actually learned once that what a hand is, or what thinking is in Descartes' case.
Yeah. The rules, grammatical rules for how you talk about a hand and what a hand is. And yeah, and I forgot it.
They forget about one step. And speaking of hand, we have the Osman problem.
Yeah, very
and
good.
which means that if we had a hand flying in the air, in the space, and if aliens would see it, they would not be able to distinguish. Okay, they could possibly say this is a hand, but they would not be able to distinguish between left and right hand, because this is a much higher state of understanding, the difference between left and right.
Yeah, yes.
But I think even in this Osma problem, we have it was Gardner who proposed it.
Yeah.
He actually jumped over one step, I think.
Hmm.
Made what is the step that he will jump off? That thing that aliens should even be able to not be able to, that they're able to recognize a hand means that aliens know actually what a hand is.
Yeah.
We actually supposing that aliens have hands.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
actually it's only in the second step you can actually point out, okay, they might not be able to distinguish between a left and right hand. So it's
Yeah,
only
exactly. That's just true.
it's like we can think about a game like a play between a left and right hand in and it's fun but ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. And thank God Wittgenstein is curing us from the G.E. Moore statements. It's just like, there's a hand here. That's indisputable. Oh my God.
And it surprises me somewhat that and it doesn't surprise me that to speak about private language, private language is not senseless. Why is not private language necessarily senseless? Let me compare with Luther's famous statement that what is it?
Solo scriptura.
Sola Scriptura, that you have only the Bible itself should be
Yeah.
that the Bible without tradition is to be the measuring device. So without tradition and so forth, that is sola scriptura. That was Luther's statement. But in one hand, it does make sense. It's not a senseless statement completely, because people were able to understand him. So we shouldn't be too quick to attack Luther, so to say, because he was okay. It was private language. Why is it a private language argument? Yes, in one way, it's a private language argument because he thinks that we can isolate the Bible and say this is the all truth. You shouldn't rely on tradition and so forth. So you can actually, but it's if you use the Bible only as Luther did, it's not that it becomes senseless because people were able to understand him, so to say. So the trap is somewhere else. Paradox is not senseless.
No.
But still, we have the beetle box example by
The beetle
Wittgenstein.
in the box, yeah, definitely.
So, so if you would to explain a beetle to a person who has never seen a beetle, or rather, you have a beetle in a box and you try to describe to a person what beetle is. It's not that it's senseless, because that's what is the problem is somewhere else. The problem is that language itself is, or my words are never enough, so to say.
Yeah.
Because you need a shared understanding. You need to show
need a
it.
shared life world, as we spoke about last time. Exactly, yeah.
So for Luther, for instance, to describe what the Bible is, he needs a shared life world.
It
of
needs to be
traditions.
there for him to be understood.
But still, people to a certain degree they can understand him. But still,
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
The
yeah.
line, the line is very subtle. Um, so Luther needs to leave the tradition which Bible is in. Instead,
Yes.
he needs to go to another tradition,
Hmm.
namely his own society,
Hmm.
16th century Germany.
Yeah.
So he leaves one tradition in order to grasp another tradition.
Hmm.
He needs to use his German language to make his understandable, but he's so to say left the traditions of the Catholic Church and so forth.
Yeah.
So he's only changing one tradition of another tradition, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know, just let me play on this one, Kalle,
Mm.
if it's okay.
Mm.
Because Wittgenstein mentions that some other place. How do you know if you understand? If I understand or someone else understand? Well, not by them saying so, but not only anyway, but how they do things. What do they do henceforth? And in the case of Luther, let's put it this way. If they understood Luther correctly, which is a pretty darned word correctly, but it's somewhat correctly, that would mean that he creates a new tradition and that tradition is stable
Mm.
and doesn't, so to speak, go into different alleys and directions and splitting up. And then he would be correct, and the Catholic Church that he is, so to speak, criticize would split up or something like that. So in the movement, am I understood? Well, I'm using the grammar correctly somehow, and therefore people understand. But I'm not too sure. It's something in that alley, maybe. It's tough to understand this.
Yes, you can actually you can have your own private language, but then you I don't know you make it into a shared language.
Hmm,
But
hmm, hmm,
perhaps
hmm.
Luther did. Okay, he already used one language that is his German. Things that people understood around him. So what is the difference between private language and shared language? That is difficult to say.
Hmm.
Um, hmm.
Yeah,
So,
it's difficult. But probably, maybe my guess is anyway that has something to do with how people act afterwards.
mm, mm,
If you tell me, Hans, go stand in the corner, and I do that,
mm,
most probably we were sharing something, both life world
mm,
and the language game. But if I went somewhere else, maybe you were speaking private language.
mm, 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 mm. I think that in the future we need to return to the Beetle box problem and perhaps read a scholarly paper about it.
Definitely,
To
definitely. It's a good idea. Very good example, the Beetle box.
mm. Well, perhaps we should leave it.
Yeah, it's
Here.
thank you very much, Kalle Lundahl. We haven't gotten into the juicy details, but you still managed to keep some comments, which is good. I say thank you very much, everyone, and have a very pleasant morning, day, or afternoon, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.